This is SimNews.TV, and you're listening to the Superleague Show. So, we should talk a little bit of a Mexican Grand Prix shindig. It was one heck of a battle. We're at the end of the season. Championships and Constructors' Championships are still up for grabs behind Rudy Van Buren, obviously. And that's what we're going to talk about. I'm Jake Sanson. Beside me, as always, Ben Willis and Kacper and Ben. Howdy, boys.
Hello.
Well,
Hello,
actually,
everyone.
I suppose it should be hola, really.
Hola, sí.
Howdy was last
Hello,
time.
señor.
Yeah, howdy was last time. Sorry about that. And actually, while we're on the subject of Austin, we didn't mention this, actually. Nordsian ran a special livery at Austin and Mexico to raise awareness for breast cancer. Their fantastic pink liveried car. Even Force India are sweating at just how good the car looks. It really is awesome. And they donated £1 for every point they scored. Do we have a tally now, Ben, as to how much they actually raised?
I don't have a tally.
But okay.
Obviously it's a great initiative though, and I think it's something it's good to highlight. It's just nice to see people doing things for charity and recognising important causes like that. And obviously with Guy's second place last time out in Austin, that's really going to help in terms of money donated. So yeah, just great effort and great thing to see on the Superleague here.
And I think it's a very good thing to see as well, considering Formula 1 did something very similar in real life. So
they did, yeah. So we almost kick-started that.
It did happen before the F1, yeah.
Maybe they saw us and went, actually, we can take that a step further. So we sort of pushed that little boat out to them.
There we go.
And they dropped anchor. Excellent. Right, so the ever-present game of musical chairs in the GPVWC Super League continues on its way. Several drivers going for different seats here at the Mexican Grand Prix. And Kacper, we saw once again, not for the first time, all change at Adonis.
Yeah, this time we didn't have Lopez again, so that's already a second race in a row where we haven't seen Lopez in. So that's kind of a disheartening thing to see, to be honest. Sergi Heras, one of the drivers, and a driver that has raced before in Japan, in fact, and actually did quite decent, finishing 8th there. So I presume it was one of the more obvious choices. And it's Jason Muscat, the second choice. So that's something that I presume needed to have some kind of a prior agreement, considering he has raced for other teams earlier on this season twice. So I presume Ben would know a bit more about that. But yeah, so Muscat in for the second seat.
Yeah, you're totally right there. Jason Muscat did do a few races for Red Archer early on in the season, so that would have probably have needed some prior agreement from the management, but that seems to have gone through okay. Other ones to mention, I would say, is the return of Thomas Hintz to Red Archer. As ever a fan favourite of ours back earlier in the season. He came back for this one for Red Archer. A debut for Matthew Marquard, taking over in the Green Stripes racing car. He's been doing really well in FC for YTF1, and nice to see him get his big break in Super League.
He is a really, really tough guy to overtake, I have to say. I did actually do the Mexico round in Formula Challenge, and he is one tough nut to crack. I think he's definitely made for Super League.
And just to point something out, somebody who's with us right now has less points now than this new driver.
He does, actually. That's a good point.
Well, we'll gloss over that one.
We'll gloss over that.
Yes, Ben.
We'll move straight on.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about qualifying. Obviously, it was going to be a tough one to beat that guy up at the front of the grid. Who's always been one of the top nuts in the championship. Rudy Van Buren, his pace, again, undeniable at Mexico, but beaten to pole position. It was one of the closest qualifying sessions we've seen all year. And right at the last, Jarl Tyen, boom, pole position ahead of David Fidek. That we weren't expecting.
Yeah, great lap from Jarl Tyen there. The last few races we've seen him, his pace has been getting better and better and better. And that lap at Mexico was absolutely brilliant. Good shout for David Fidek, second place as well, beating both Bob Bulls, who could only really make it third and fourth. Kacper out qualifying Van Buren as well. That's quite a crucial one there. Only by 0.003 of a second, but interesting to see Kacper out-qualify his teammate. Other honourable mentions is actually Mr. Marcard in the green stripes, P8.
Eighth position. Is that the highest a green stripes has actually qualified all season?
Oh, I think it could be, actually.
I think it might have been. That is an amazing performance. Really, really sensational.
Really good. And Ben Horrell 7th as well. So another great performance from him. Quite a few people who did have penalties, and I think Van Buren included, who actually ended up starting 14th on the grid. I think he did take a new engine.
Gaia didn't even take part in qualifying.
Gaia as well. So yeah, a few people there having to take some penalties, but really close, a really exciting qualifying session.
Now, of course, this is the Mexico City circuit, Kacper, so it was always going to be very easy to overtake on a start-finish straight with DRS. There was some pretty awesome-looking maneuvers, but again, that whole sort of purity argument with DRS, perhaps there were maybe... Would we have seen as many overtakes without the DRS, do you think? Would it still have been a good race even if we hadn't had it?
I think, honestly, with how this track is, and considering I'm pretty sure we do not simulate how thin the air on that track in reality is. I think we'd still have quite a bit of drafting, and I'd say yes, without DRS we'd still see a lot of overtakes, considering the overtakes that we did see were not marginal. Usually they were you could come from a fair ways back and still do quite a bit. So I think the DRS definitely made it too easy on this track personally, but I'm not generally a person who hates or likes DRS. It's just a thing that's there. So in my opinion, it's just, I think maybe the zones may have been a bit too long or something just not quite right there. But yeah, I think the DRS made it a little too easy personally.
So when we look at the actual starting grid, I mean, we want to talk about that in a bit of detail because we saw the qualifying. Rudy Van Buren was right up there in the top 4, but his penalty knocked him back to 14th. Gergo Baldi was down in 19th at the start, Flo Guy down in 22nd. So can I just point out the top 6 for this starting grid? It reads like the absolute golden race grid. I mean, Jarl Tyne on pole from David Fidek and Risto Kacper. 4th place, Ben Schupanek. Ben Schupanek was on the second row of the grid. He must have been having a nosebleed at how brilliantly he got himself into position. And then on the 3rd row, get this, we had Stormfighter's Ben Horrell. He must have been delighted, the Welshman who's really been strong in the latter half of the season. And 6th on the grid, that South African new boy, Matthew Marcard. He got himself on the 3rd row of the grid. Green stripes for them, that's a victory. That is like a race win. And absolutely incredible. But because of those drivers starting out of position, the likes of Van Buren, Baldi, Gaia, we had some absolutely cracking racing, amazing overtakes all the way through. But it wasn't easy for that man, Rudy Van Buren, to win. Not only did he have to start from 14th, but let's be fair here, Ben. Both Jarl Tyne and the entire Wouters team, they really turned up in Mexico.
That Wouters was really fast this weekend. Great pace. I think Martex did have a bit of an engine upgrade for Mexico as well, which obviously helped with the long straights. It was just really fast in a straight line. Great with DRS overtaking as well. And a great result for Wouters in terms of the championship as well. P2, P5. Brilliant in terms of points haul. Means they sort of solidify their claim to 3rd in the constructors standings, which is really good. And Tyne, had it not been for a bit of a wobble in his final stint in terms of pace, I think Tyne could have won that. He was all over Van Buren.
Honestly, I think a lot of it may have been down to his slightly different strategy as well in the race. There was a lot of back and forth between himself and Van Buren throughout the entire race. And I just need to check. And yes, Tyne did one less pit stop. So that was his plan all along. But I think it just... possibly, I think if he went for the pure 6 pits run and just pushed a little bit more, I think that Tyne could have had it, to be perfectly honest.
I agree. I think he played a little slightly too conservative in terms of trying to cut out a pit stop that it didn't quite work. But he certainly scared Van Buren, I think.
I mean, he was only 9 seconds back at the flag.
Which is not much at all.
That's absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Fantastic stuff. And obviously we had Risto there in 3rd position, and both David Fidek and Flo Guy doing their best in the Nordsian. But compared to Rudy Van Buren and Jarl Tyne, it was like these guys were nowhere. They were about 24, 25 seconds behind them at the flag. I was actually really surprised that these guys didn't throw more of a candle to their battle, Kacper. I thought they'd be right with them.
Yeah, it's a little bit disappointing. Although, then again, we have Geyer started from the very back, hasn't even qualified. Fidok just very disappointing. Really, just started up very, very high and somehow he nearly kind of disappeared throughout the race. He
Yeah,
had
it was just decidedly average, wasn't it?
yeah,
Really.
yeah. So very for somebody who was contending for a championship run until recently, it's a bit of disappointing. Maybe just maybe just everything is coming down now, and he just can't quite get himself to push that car as hard as he had for the last while. Maybe just preparing for the next season nearly.
Well, it was costly, finishing in fourth position compared to Rudy Van Buren in the victor's position, with Risto Capit in third as well. He could have taken some valuable points off them if he had beaten Risto Capit. He was only 0.6 of a second behind him at the flag, but what that basically means is that Nordsian could have gained 3 more points, and Vodbull could have lost 3 more points. So by my mathematics, they would actually have ended up
6 points.
being 6 points ahead, I think. It turns
Yep.
out they ended up being 5 points behind now coming out of this race. So Nordsian have got to find something to pull away from this because we've only got 2 races left of the season now in Brazil and Abu Dhabi. So they really need to find something to bring it back. I want a bit of a shout out for Gergo Baldi, actually. He started right the way down the back. He climbed his way up to 5th position and he did what he does at the end, set the fastest lap, take that pride off of Rudy Van Buren. Nicely done. But it was the reason I want to mention it is because how he did it. Half a second quicker than any other fastest lap in the entirety of the race. He did a 1:19.6. Nobody else could get below 1:20. That is absolutely astonishing, Kacper, even for Gergo Baldi.
No, that's absolutely amazing, and I just need to quickly compare that. Just to give you an idea, that is just 0.8 of a second slower than Jarl Tyen's qualifying pole lap. That is absolutely something that's incredible, and I have no idea how anybody can pull that off in a ladder, even in latter stages of the race.
Well, contrast Wouter's race to their rivals in the Constructors' Championship, Adonis. Wouter scored 31 points in that race. Adonis, they only scored 8. 8 points in that race. I know Muscat and Heras are new drivers for them, and they finished a lap and 2 laps down respectively. But this is not good, and this is going to cost them in terms of their development for next season. Falling at the final hurdle, Ben, in terms of losing a good haul of constructors' points, that's really not looking good heading into 2018.
Yeah, Adonis seem to have got themselves into a bit of a pickle with drivers in terms of how many they've had on contract all season. What they've got left at the moment to use. It's not really ideal now they've lost the use of Siebel, who was doing really well for the team. They've lost the use of Dennis Jordan as well because they've both run out of remaining races on their contract. Yeah, they're going to sort of falter towards the end of the season, which is not ideal. It definitely may cost them a shot at P3 in the title, which is not ideal. And as well, having contracted yet more drivers, they're costing the team less money next season. So it's a tough one. It's not a situation you want to be in as a team manager. But 2 new drivers brought home 2 points positions. It's something to take away, and hopefully they can build on that for next race.
Well, let's talk about another positive. We go to the Welshman now, Ben Horrell. Again, really impressive display, great driving throughout. Started in P5, finished in P7 in a car that was not expected to run well. He was the first of the lapped drivers home, shall we say. But let's look at some of the drivers he's beaten across the line. He beat Thomas Hinz, he beat Tobias Olsen, he beat Lucas Euler. He's beat some top talent there. And again, he's showing, how brilliant he is in terms of car setup, Kacper. Is he going to be in that seat next year? Does he deserve to be in that seat next year? I'd say yes, personally.
If you asked me that 3 or 4 races ago, I'd say heck no. But now he's been starting to be really consistent. This is a very good turn for Ben Horrell, and I'd say if he does the following race at the same kind of pace he's been doing, and if he continues that kind of a good form, not faltering again, because we have seen him do that, have a decent couple races and then fall off again. if he can maintain this form, he definitely deserves a place in the next season.
Well, there's another thing we want to talk about. Red Archer, okay, it was great to see Thomas Hinz back in the car. He brought the car home in, ninth position. Not bad considering he's been out for half the season. Disappointing, though, for Michael Ayres, not finishing the race. That's going to hurt the team quite a lot, actually, even in this latter stage of the season, Ben. But good to see Thomas Hinz back. Hopefully he's back for the rest of the season because they could really use those points.
I really do hope so. I think whilst Thomas may not be the fastest of all the drivers out there, he's great on time management, he's great on consistency, and that is what scores points in Super League. So really nice to see him come back and score a P9. Great result. Unlucky with Ayres with the DNF. Hopefully, he can get a points finish next time out because they're only actually 20 points behind Madcape. So there's a real possibility of P6 in terms of the title. And if Hawkeye keep faltering, as I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, P5 is possibly on the table, to be honest. They're only 40 points behind. It's possible.
That's very true. And yes, it is worth talking about Hawkeye because there is only one way to describe this, really. I'm going to use a Harry Potter term here. It's a howler. An absolute howler from these guys, to be fair, because let's face it, they've got Alex Cooper and Lucas Euler in their team. Two world-class drivers. This is a bit like Fernando Alonso and Jenson Button at McLaren for 2015 through 17. It's been an awful, awful run for them in this particular race because Lucas Euler, this just starkly paints the picture of the difference between rFactor 1 and rFactor 2. rFactor 1, Lucas Euler, legend, cannot be beaten on the best of his days. Absolutely dominant, supreme driver. rFactor 2 in this current format, he looks completely average. This is an appalling state of affairs for a man who is a world champion. And Alex Cooper, yes, okay, he had that penalty to take into the race to start 20th, fought his way through, brake failure at the end of the race. I mean, the only team that's looking worse in terms of their form that should be in a higher position at the moment than them is Madcape, and that's saying quite a lot at this late stage in the year.
Yeah, Madcape, obviously, we're going to get to later, but yeah, it's sad, and I don't think even Cooper was doing that badly until his inevitable doom with the brake failure. Now, I presume that that's due to having just insufficient braking, or because I doubt that's just purely on braking style.
Probably went quite aggressive on the setup as well, just to get that straight line speed. Probably run a bit more blanking on the brake ducts, and that's cost him.
But that's something that I've seen more in SC, to be honest, in terms of brake failures. We have seen a good few there, but in Super League, I don't think we really see that very often. And yeah, it's purely just a problem. It's something that I guess it's a risk that didn't pay off, and it's gonna be a tough one. I don't think at this rate, if this is how they're gonna go, they're gonna have any chance of really, even like this, they're not gonna have much chance of catching up to Adonis. But Euler, yeah, he's just it could be a bit like Jarltine. Jarltine did come back in and kind of had one good race, then kind of faltered off for a while, and then came back. Maybe it's something like that of Euler as well, and maybe we'll see him up there next season, but it's going to be a very tough one to come back to.
Well, we certainly hope so. More positives, though, for Storm and for Green Stripes. There were points on the board. Very good to see them. From Tobias Olsen, solid race from him to be in the top 10. Liam Duval didn't really make it to the flag, although, well, yes, he did, but he didn't because he was that far back. For Green Stripes, though, joy for Matthew Marquardt on his debut, put it in 6th position on the grid. Let's take the reality of that and still say 8th position on the grid. We've mentioned it before, but wow, what a debut in arguably the worst car on the grid, and he's been absolutely incredible. Great drive, great debut, and I'm really hoping that a big team snaps him up for next year because it's so deserved. Well, he was running as high as 5th position at one stage as well. We need to talk about that. It's incredible.
Yeah, great performance from Marquardt in what is arguably, well, as we say, it's the worst car on the grid now that Woods aren't there. So really good to see there. Yeah, I do hope he gets a drive next season. I think he's been doing pretty well.
However, they might not be the worst team on the grid. And I hate to say this, but we are now pointing towards a team called Madcape. Because let's be fair, They have gone from being Williams in 1991 to Andrea Moda in 1992. I mean, the embarrassment just keeps going on for this team. I mean, where on earth do we begin? Mikhail Galka did the best he could from 8th on the grid. Fair play. Top 10 in qualifying. Okay, that's respectable. 15th in the race, 2 laps down. No pace, no poise, no control at all. And team boss Xavier de Carvalho having to step in and race himself. What a disappointment. Absolutely. The only word to use for this, Kacper, really, is it's an implosion every time they come out onto the track.
Yeah, although to be honest, I think, and we have mentioned this before, this was inevitable. The only thing that was keeping this team together in the first place was a person who's now banned from the league. It was Lee Morris, and it's sad state of affairs. They can't get a driver to push that car around. We must remember that Matt Cape was never a good car to begin with the entire season. It was underdeveloped, always understaffed, and now we see the effects of what happens when you don't have a world championship class speed of a driver in a car like this. It just is a disappointment on every level, and I don't see them picking themselves up from that, at least this season, and they'll be lucky to be racing next season with something like with this kind of disappointment.
It is what it is, what it is. Let's talk about the race results then. Rudy Van Buren taking the win, as we've said, from Jarl Tyen by just 9 seconds. Risto Capit from David Feidek, Gergo Baldi and Flo Gaia rounding out the top 6. In the top 10, we had Ben Horrell, Ben Jupanek, Thomas Hinz and Tobias Olsen. The final point scorers, Jason Muscat, Lucas Euler, Sergei Heras, Matthew Marquardt on his debut, and the final car home in the points is Mikhail Galka. And what that has done to the championship standings, well, it's still obviously Rudy Van Buren who leads the way. No arguments at all about that one. And it's getting very tight indeed, of course, in the Constructors' Championship, as we've already mentioned. 5 points between the leading 2 manufacturers. But before we go any further and talk about, confirming race results or championship standings, we have to bring in a bombshell, because there are reports coming in here at SimNews.TV that all of the top 4 may have been reporting each other for various abuses of track limits. So we are still waiting for the pending outcome from the race director, but expect penalties in the range of potentially up to 20 seconds for some of the drivers. I mean, the details are sketchy at this point, but it could change the results, not just in the race, not just in terms of the points, but also in terms of the Constructors' Championship. And apparently, there are no penalties for both the Vodball drivers. Rudy Van Buren was reported to have had 1 track limit cut, Risto 2 cuts, but Jarl apparently 23 cuts have been reported over the course of the race. So it's possible we may have 20 seconds penalty for him, and possibly David Feidek 17 cuts. So if the mathematics works up, that could be 14 seconds penalty. So we just don't know, and that could obviously change things dramatically, Ben, for the Constructors' Championship, because that will give I almost said Red Bull, could give Vodball, I should say, that kind of dominant lead that we were used to seeing from the drinks company in F1. We're about to see that come back to where it was earlier in the season.
Yeah, so I think it's very prudent to stress this is still TBC. The penalties aren't marked as official, but we believe they have been logged on the system and have gone to the relevant drivers. There is obviously options to appeal and etc. But was it unsurprising at Mexico? It's quite an easy track to cut, and given what's in stake in terms of how close the battle at the top of the Constructors' title is, I think it was only a matter of time before we'd start seeing these kind of protests. We'll see what happens there. I'm sure it's something we'll discuss for the next show. It's a little disappointing to see this kind of protesting to gain effect, but then,
it's a bit weak, isn't it?
Then when you're fighting for every point, it is what it is, isn't it? It's that kind of business. So we'll see.
Second in the Drivers' Championship at the moment is Kacper and Feidek, just 2 points between them with 2 races to go. So that's very tight. 5 points between Vodball and Nordsian in Vodball's favour at the moment. That could dramatically change if Feidek is given a penalty. Wouters has 54 points on Adonis for third. They have 18 on Hawkeye for fifth. They have 13 on Mad Cake for sixth. How dramatically has their championship gone down? Red Archer could even catch them because they're 20 points adrift, so they could even make it into the top six if Thomas Hinz is back in the car and at full pelt. Right. Best and worst. It's that point when every driver crosses their fingers and says, I hope they don't pick me. I hope they don't pick me. Kacper, best driver of the day.
Honestly, I think Jarl Tyne, he's shown some fantastic pace and has been. I think he was very much contesting for the win, and just some some different choices, trying a different strategy to get a one up on other drivers, just turned out not to work out. But to be honest, I think he's possibly showing that he is ready for the next season, and he is ready to put a challenge up to anybody, and it's going to be attempting for a championship drive next season, which it would be lovely to see from Jarl Tyne. I think that's all I can say about the best driver.
That's a good call, a really good call. Ben, any arguments to that?
I think Tyne would also be a very strong choice for that one. I think I gave it to him last time, but I think for best driver again, Ben Horrell, because yet again he's proving that he's sort of turned a corner compared to the majority of this season. He was running up, fourth, fifth, great strategy, great driving. I do think he's generally turned a corner, and
Fair enough.
He's doing really well there.
I'm going to give it to Matthew Marquardt.
Fair enough.
I'm going to give it to Matthew. I'm sorry, to come from Formula Challenge, straight in at Super League, get it on the fourth row of the grid in your first qualifying session, in the green stripes car, and run as high as fifth in the early stages. Okay, he finished 14th, but, that kind of driving from a rookie, that's one of the best rookie performances, probably going back to Maciej Mlinek at the start of the season in Australia. Yeah. I'd say that's, right up there as one of the very best rookie performances we've seen this season. So I'm giving it to Marquardt. Best team. Who did the best job in terms of the team strategy? Ben Willis.
Wouters. Well, between Wouters and Vodbull. Obviously, Vodbull for picking up the points they needed on Nordsen and turning the tide in the battle for the constructors. But Wouters for, really mixing it up with the big two, scoring some great points and really solidifying that P3 in the title. And as I've said before, watch out for them next season.
Okay, Kacper, what are your thoughts?
I think it's hard to argue against that point. Nordsen just wasn't quite visible there, just not doing quite so well. So yeah, I think honestly I'll give it to Wouters just on the basis that they did have two cars, very competitive. Baldy going up, Baldy actually gaining more places than Rudy throughout the race. So they did a great job to finish both cars in the top five. And even if Jarl does get dropped, according to the penalties we have said, he's only going to drop one place since Vidok is also getting a penalty. So yeah, I think honestly Wouters very much deserves the team of this Grand Prix.
Okay, I'm going to give a slightly different answer just to be different, and I'm going to give it to SRS. Now that's a very unusual choice. That's an unusual choice because obviously David Frančić was taken off at the first turn. But if you do the math, David was looking reasonably strong in qualifying, about the same sort of pace as Thomas Hinz and Tobias Olsen. They ended up 9th, 10th, so they would have been around the top 10. Ben Horrell is obviously their captain of the ship at the moment, and they looked after his strategy really well. He was able to utilize it very strongly. I think we're not really sure where David Frančić would have ended up, but I have a feeling it would have been a decent result. So I think of the minnows, I think SRS deserves a bit of credit for that.
That's fair enough.
Fair enough.
Right. The worsts. Who did the worst? Who was the worst driver of the race? Kacper Kolodijczyk, I throw it to you. Who's your
it's
worst?
Always tough. I'll be honest, I'm still so very disappointed in Lucas Euler. He may be coming 12th, but he is a person who we expect more from. He may not be in the best car on the grid, and the Hawkeye obviously. But even Alex Cooper, as far as I can recall, it was very much faster than him throughout the entire Grand Prix. So honestly, I feel like Lucas Oiler is a big disappointment still, even though he's been racing for a little bit now here.
Fair enough. Ben Willis, your thoughts on this one?
Alex Cooper for not testing enough and realizing that he would probably run out of brakes. That's something you can test. You know what the weather's going to be like in advance. You know how much you're going to be using the brakes. It's really easy to get brake temperatures in rfactor. It's in the default overlay. So a little disappointing that they didn't do enough testing there and didn't realize that they were going to run out of brakes towards the other race. So that really cost Hawkeye some points there.
I think it's a tie between the two of them, actually.
Yeah.
I think both of you have given a very good argument there. I think I'd have to give it a joint for once. We don't do a joint very often, but Lucas Oiler and Alex Cooper, I think, unfortunately, have earned the right to do that. Worst team, Ben Willis, what's your thought on the worst team performance?
Well, I mean, going on from that, it would then be Hawkeye. Although Mad Cape as well.
Yeah.
The fact that they're mustering 1 point when they're meant to be.
Kacper, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, as much as we can talk about the individuals being kind of disappointing from Hawkeye, I think Mad Cape, it's more of a disappointment as an entire team, not just individual drivers. Since the drivers, the drivers are just maybe not accustomed to these cars, or maybe not just as quick as. So we don't expect them to be that high up, since we don't really know them from prior experiences. But the team as it is, it's still such a disappointment ever since Lee Morris left the team.
Right. Do you know what? It's Hawkeye versus Mad Cape. I'm going to flip a coin. No, seriously. I'm going to flip a coin. That is the point where.
Do you have a coin to hand?
I have a coin to hand. Right.
Good.
Heads, it's Mad Cape, and tails, it's Hawkeye. You ready?
Oof.
Okay, here we go. It's Hawkeye. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's Hawkeye.
This is some really accurate picking here.
We do the science here on this show. Really do. Sorry, guys, but yeah, it was that close. Right, next up, it is the Brazilian Grand Prix. A very high chance of rain, as always. Please let it rain. I'm sorry. I'm an absolute stickler for carnage and chaos. I'm sure we'll get something that will shake things up over the course of the weekend in terms of weather. Top speed versus aerodynamics in that middle sector, always such a difficult one, considering that you're plowing into that very long flowing right-hander in fifth gear, desperately trying to keep it on the power, and then you're tippy-toeing in second gear for the first part of Bico de Pato, first gear in the second part. It's just such a difficult one in terms of the technical side of things, Kacper. Such a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, Interlagos is an absolutely stunning track, and it's such a fast track. It's short, but that's nothing to take away to say that it's not fantastic. Again, Mexico is also not the longest track, of course, but yeah, it's just such a flowing track, and there are quite a few interesting opportunities to overtake as well, long straights, heavy braking points, and obviously, I hope we get some action through the Senes's. That could be beautiful.
Oh, yeah. I can sense maybe, Ben, going into that first couple of quarters, we might have some shenanigans. It's very tight, very, very tricky in that part of the course. That's true, yes. That's true. I was rather hoping you wouldn't bring up tonight's Formula Challenge race, but there you go. You did, and that's fine. You lose points for that. Right, we'll move on. We'll move on to shows. Don't forget, of course, we are back on the 9th of November. Do please follow our Twitter feed at SLShowSN. Use the hashtag SLShow if you're communicating with us on the old TweetDeck or Twitter. And, of course, follow our commentary partners at Downforce UK. Some big things coming from them in 2018, and hopefully a longer alliance with GPVWC in the 2018 season. Whoop, whoop. That's what we like. More of those, please. My big thank you once again to Ben Willis and to Kacper Kolodijik. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Pleasure as always.
And with 2 races still to go, there are still 2 battles that we need to keep an eye on at Brazil and Abu Dhabi. The first of which is for second in the Drivers' Championship, Risto Capit versus David Feidek. And in the Constructors' Championship, 5 points in it between Vodbull and Nordsjön. 2 races to settle it. Next time you come back to us on the 9th of November, you're going to be in for a very interesting bit of analysis as to how it all shook down. I'm Jake Sanson. See you next time on the Super League Show.